This evening I have the opportunity to report back to you on the trip that was made to Guyana in the northeastern part of South America between the 3rd and the 16th of March 2009. There were two of us in this congregation who went. I was one of those. Jennifer Gondos was the other. And on behalf of both of us, we just want to thank you a lot. My thanks to the elders for giving me the time off to be able to go. My thanks to all of you for tolerating my absence and for filling in some of the things that I do while I was gone. Thank you for the financial support that you made to the travel funds for both of us and for the many things that you put in the trunk that we were able to deliver to them, and I'll show you some pictures of that later. And thank you for your prayers for our safety, and your prayers for the success of our evangelistic efforts there. I want to acknowledge here also the Schertz Church of Christ in Summerdale, Alabama. They are the ones who oversee and are responsible for this particular kind of missionary trip into Guyana. And notice it's called the Amerindian Missions. I guess I thought maybe the people south of Mexico, all of them were of some Hispanic or Spanish descent. It's not so. They're Indians. They're American Indians, just like some of our ancestors were American Indians. They are South American Indians, not North American Indians, but hence the name Amerindian. Amerindian is what they're called. This particular effort involved journeys to two different villages in Guyana. There was a group of us that gathered together. Some went on one truck to Awarrenau, that's where Jennifer and I went. Some went to a different village. But I tell you, the people who oversee this are very conscientious about the work, and I'll have an opportunity to say more about that in a minute. Getting to that village involved a lot of travel. We met at the airport in Miami. That's not all of us. That's some of us who gathered there. And we had a flight from Miami, changed plane at Port of Spain in the country of Trinidad and Tobago, somewhere around 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Arrived in Georgetown on the coast of Guyana somewhere around midnight. And when we arrived there, one of the first things we had to do was to take our large pieces of luggage, including the two big black trunks that you helped fill up, and we had to wrap those in black plastic bags because the plane that was going to take us from one side of Guyana to the other was only going to be able to transport us on a small piece of luggage. So at midnight or so, we're wrapping our big bags in plastic sacks and helping put them on a truck where they would make the journey overland. And then again, somewhere around midnight, we checked in the Tropical View International Motel. And when the dawn came, you can make your own judgment of whether that's what you think of when you think of a tropical view. But it was clean enough, it was neat enough, the air conditioners worked well enough, and we were glad to have a good night's rest. Because the next morning, where were we? We were back at another airport, a different airport, this time preparing for the flight that would take us from one side of Guyana to the other. Smaller plane, you can see why the big bags and the trunks just would not fit. Now here is the section that we went to. There is Guyana. I had to remind myself about some basic geography and history. When I went to school back those many years ago, there was a French Guyana, and it's still there. In the middle was a Dutch Guyana, that's now called Suriname or Suriname, and there was a British Guyana. Well, that British Guyana is now called Guyana, and that's where we went. And because the British were the ones who were responsible for it, it's an English-speaking country, the only English-speaking country in South America. I was very impressed with the school system. I have a feeling their 4th, 5th, and 6th graders probably read and speak English better, actually maybe better than some of our high school students. Now, there are some people there, some of the older people, who still speak the native Amerindian language of Wapishani, and I'll give you an example of some things that were translated into that. But our next journey was from Georgetown on the coast over to Lethem, a smaller town on the other side of Guyana. And there is the airport. So actually, I don't think that's the airport. That's just some of the buildings close to the airport in Lethem. Here is the layout of the city of Lethem, thanks to Google Maps. Here is the runway, and you can see from the size of the runway that it's not really a very big town that's there. Right in this area here where the red dot with the yellow around it, that's downtown. Downtown means a couple of general stores. This little area right here, that's the airport terminal. When you get off the plane, you walk to the airport terminal. And oh, by the way, right across the street, at one time at least, was a street vendor. And that screen vendor, you may notice, is selling a hat that looks very much like the new hat that Kenny has. Well, that was located here. The place that we stayed was the Savannah Inn. It looks a little dusty, but again, the accommodations were plenty good. That was located a little ways away. And down in the lower right-hand corner is where the church building was located. It's the Lethem Church of Christ, or it's really kind of between two cities. It's called the St. Ignatius Lethem Church of Christ. Very adequate building. And next to the building, which was the assembly area for the church, was another building, and that's the preaching school in Lethem. That preaching school is directed by Thomas George. I was impressed with Thomas. Been a Christian about 5 years. Solid Bible student. Very personable guy. I had a chance to listen to him teach the gospel one-on-one to people. Very patient, very deliberate. I was impressed with Thomas. Now, I'm going to give you some idea of just some of the little roads that we journeyed. From our motel, we had to go up to the Digicel place, which was where we got our cell phones. And also, there's the little red line to the church building. We went back and forth to the church building many times during the day and a half or so we were there preparing for that truck ride to the village. We went back and forth to the church building many times. I only remember riding once. We walked the other times. Hence, you'll see my little waypoint for the shortcut. When you're walking back and forth a lot of times, shortcuts become important. But these red lines are not just commuter paths. We learned they were evangelistic opportunities. Walking along those paths, one morning we were walking to the church building about the time that the students were going to school. And we had an opportunity to walk along with them. And the moment on the left, you will see somebody that you know who's struck up a conversation going down the road about the church building that we're going to. Had an opportunity to walk along with her all the way to the little town of Lethem. Of course, we went beyond that to the school. As we walked along the roads, Jennifer, who's been to this particular village I guess to Lethem more than 3 times, she met a lot of people that she knew, renewed some acquaintances. And sometimes along the paths that we walked, we found people who were Christians, maybe some who were not as faithful as they should be. Over there, people are not isolated from one another by air-conditioned cars. When you commute, you have an opportunity to do some evangelism. Well, we were there in Lethem, and then we began to prepare for the truck ride. There were a lot of things that had to go into those 2 big trucks. 2 power supplies, because again, it was 2 trucks going to 2 different villages, and of course the sewing machines. I don't know that I fully appreciated all that those sewing machines were going to mean until I got there. I'll show you some pictures after a while I did. A lot of things had to go into the trucks. Now, these 2 men, the man on the right in the khaki, he was the guy who was responsible for getting all those things in the truck. He was the logistician for the 2 trucks that were going to the 2 different villages. Frederick Darrell, just a wonderful man. The guy on the left, his name is Jerry Davidson. He is the person from the Summerdale Church that's responsible for these missions, these Amerindian missions that go into Guyana. 20, 30 years ago, he did some work in Trinidad and Tobago. Now he has a single focus on these Amerindian missions. He says he doesn't go anyplace else. This has become his life work for now. I enjoyed meeting him very much. What an advantage it is when you have one person that has such a single focus. The truck ride. Well, thanks to handheld GPS, I can show you exactly where we went on the truck ride. You see the little blue line? And you can't see all the twists and the turns, and I assure you, you can't see the bumps. You may have an idea from the terrain there that it might not be a smooth ride. I wanted to find some way to give you an idea of what the truck ride was like. And I have a few short video clips pieced together. I don't know that you can tell so much. I mean, you can see the bumps, but listen. Listen to the people go, You may get a better listening experience of what the truck ride was like. And at the end of this clip, I'm trying to take a picture. I'm not sure whether I was trying to take a picture of the cloud or a picture of the tree, but you can see it wasn't an easy job to take a picture.
That's a good one.
some people, I've paid good money for roller coaster rides that weren't nearly that good, and they didn't last nearly that long. Well, the question may occur to you. I will tell you, it certainly, I got bruises on my back after I got there. The next time on the return trip, I patted myself a lot better, thanks to some ideas from Jennifer. I still got bruises. But I love the truck ride. But it may occur to you, well, why don't you just send the big pieces of luggage on that big old truck, and why don't the rest of you get some nice 16-passenger van? Well, the problem is, to get to those villages, you have to go through some places that the nice little cushy van would just not make. And you can see the other truck there. This was a part of the journey where we shared the same path and went along together. But we got there. And you can see that those who have been there before attract quite a crowd when they arrive. Going back to the same place more than one time builds a friendship. It builds a rapport. And you can see the results of that as the friends of Jennifer greet her when we were there. Then we began to unload the truck. And after you get the truck unloaded, it's time to set up the tents. This is the pasture land behind the church building. You can see the church building there. By the way, they make their church buildings. They build them. North Americans provide the funds for the raw materials, but they do the construction work. They make their own brick. They make their own mortar. They do a lot of work. But there's the pasture land where we were and where the tents were set up. And we did get the tents set up. And I will tell you, I kind of thought the truck ride was fun, at least at times. Living in that little tent that was so short that I could not stand up in it, that was probably the big challenge for me. You got the suitcases on one side, you got the bed on the other, you try to unzip the zipper, you get in, you try to sit down, leave your shoes on the outside, turn around. Between the suitcases and the bed and all the gadgets that I had in there, that was probably the greatest challenge for me. The interesting thing about living in a tent is sometimes when you look out your door, you see some very interesting things. Sometimes they're of pleasant interest, and sometimes maybe not so pleasant interest. We were in the barnyard with the cows and with the chickens, and I said, this gave me a whole new understanding of the phrase, going to bed with the chickens. But the thing about going to bed with the chickens is you don't have to worry about setting... You don't have to worry about setting the alarm clock. It comes with the accommodations. And of course, cows, bull, cattle all over the place. And of course, these were wild and vicious animals. And only the bravest of cowboys would even dare approach one of these vicious beasts. Actually, they were amazingly tame. Here is a picture of a cow that is enjoying a snack based on one of the black plastic bags that I had taken with me. This is about 20 or 30 feet from my tent. You learn you don't leave anything outside your tent, not if you ever want to see it again. But these animals are very important to them, and healthy-looking animals. Unlike the cattle that we saw in India, as you can see, healthy-looking animals. And very important, even important for transportation. They are essentially the white family van. And as you can see, there is the single-seater sports model, if you're a little bit more adventuresome. But we got there. There's the church building. Now, this part here is not the church building. That's the preacher's home. They built a preacher's home, 2 small bedrooms, an area that sort of doubles as a kitchen or perhaps a living room. But I tell you, that room became extremely important to us while we were there because that was the kitchen. And the kitchen is no better than the people who work in the kitchen. In upper right-hand corner is Sister Baby. That's her name. Before I went there, I heard about Sister Baby's bread. I tell you, I can no more describe to you Sister Baby's bread than I can describe the truck ride. Sister Baby's bread was something extraordinary. Mornings we had scrambled eggs, Vienna sausage with some sort of sauce on them that they call sausage, and Sister Baby's bread. And it was great. In the evening, usually rice, some kind of chicken dish. Sister Baby, and then Frida. I mentioned Thomas George, who was the director of the preaching school back in Lethem. This was his wife. She helped in the kitchen, and eating was a good experience there. They say an army moves on its stomach. Well, sometimes the Lord's evangelistic army moves on its stomach too, and there are no complaints about the cooking. Now these three buildings. The one on the left is the ladies' restroom. The one in the middle is the men's restroom. And the one on the right is the shower. And probably the less said about those buildings, the better. But we all made it there. And something I didn't fully understand or appreciate was that when we got to Lethem, where the whole team got assembled, it was not just a team of North Americans. It was a combined team of North American Christians and South American Christians. And I tell you, you can see some of those. One who's walking toward us, his name's Ernest. Well, he is, and they all were. We have wonderful brethren, competent, capable, talented Bible students, Bible teachers. What a joy it was to have fellowship with them. And they were preachers. Not all of them were preachers, but preachers and members from around Guyana, some from Trinidad and Tobago, all came together to form these two teams that went to the two different villages. Where were we? In the village of Awarwanao, variously pronounced. What does it mean, a village? Well, for several miles in every direction, there are these little clusters of homes. Probably here we would call them neighborhoods. I thought you might like to see what they look like. The terrain is beautiful, gently flowing terrain, green, sort of like Texas on a very wet summer. Every few hundred yards, maybe a quarter mile, is another clump of houses, another neighborhood of people, scattered over really quite a large area, the village of Awarwanao. That's where we were. Now, what would we do? Well, there was a lot of personal evangelism that took place. I'll explain those initials, EBWA, in a minute. And of course, I had opportunities to do some preaching. Jennifer and I both had opportunities to do teaching classes. And one of the important things that we did with your help, was show that we cared about these people. Now, the EBWA, many years ago, there was a management concept called MBWA. It was called Management by Wandering Around. The boss did not sit in his office and summon everybody in to come give the project reports. He just kind of wandered from office to office and would drop in on people and see how they were doing with their projects. Well, let me tell you, over there what we did was evangelism by wandering around. There you see a couple of the brothers heading toward a little cluster of houses. And in these houses, and you'll see another cluster not too far from it, at least my experience was there was almost always somebody at home. Sometimes it was the man. Sometimes he was a craftsman. His home or behind his home was his workshop. He would be there. Friendly people, humble people, quiet people, very willing to talk to you about spiritual things. Sometimes the man was in the field and only the woman was there, and hence the great importance of having some women that were available. Women are needed to teach, and you'll see some examples of that in a moment. But women are also needed because sometimes when it's only a woman at home, you really need to have a woman to feel comfortable being able to teach just that woman that's there. Who did I meet? This man's name is Joseph. Joseph had been sent, and he had completed a whole series of Bible correspondence courses that had been mailed to him by a woman in Florida. This man knew some things about the Bible, bright, articulate. But some people who had gotten a hold of him had taught him that we should worship on Saturday, not Sunday. And they had some way linked the fact that we should worship on Sunday with the teaching that Jesus must have been in the grave 3 24-hour periods. Well, Jesus did talk about the sign of Jonah 3 days and 3 nights. But you know, Jesus also said he'd be resurrected the third day. I tried to explain to the man, if Jesus used both those phrases, Jesus was not confused. They must mean the same thing. And then finally I said to him, look, if you believe that Jesus was in the grave 3 24-hour periods, then shouldn't the scriptures say he was resurrected on the 4th day and not the 3rd day? Made him stop and think. Maybe hung a little question mark in his heart. Had 2 or 3 opportunities to study with Joseph. That miniature bow and arrow set that he has on the right-hand side is the same one that's in my office now. It's not there because I bought them. It's there because he gave them to me. He seemed to appreciate us coming by and spending some time. And I should mention Darmendra. Darmendra was the Amerindian who went with me on some of the opportunities that I had to teach. A delight to be with. But that's Joseph. This is Mrs. Sam, as she was known. She had a garden that would make almost anybody jealous. That's an okra stalk there. She had a wonderful garden, but she was a very talented craftsman. She made some things. One thing I'll show you in a second here, she made a hammock. And she made it from scratch. And by what I mean from scratch is you pick the cotton and you put the little cotton balls together and you kind of comb them or spread them. That's what she started with. And she would take the little pieces of cotton and kind of spread them out, and she would hook them on her little spinner and spin them into a string. And I thought you might like to see how that process took place. In this clip, you'll hear her saying, it takes a long time, sometimes months.
This takes very long time to spin in hand like this.
Right.
Take a long time. Yes, months and months to spin. Yeah.
An example of what she made is the hammock that hangs behind us. I think she said 2 months to make the hammock. But she was a craftsman at home, but she gave us the opportunity to study the Bible with her. She was a very conscientious woman. Evidently, the religious group she'd been assembling with, basically, she just got tired of their hypocrisy. She knew the way they lived their lives, the way they drank during the week, and she just no longer assembled with them. And it seems that she had a group maybe that assembled there at her house. And as we tried to talk to her, she kept talking about Christian living, Christian living, Christian living. Well, that's important, but that's not all of it. The worship that they were offering, they weren't doing the Lord's Supper every first day of the week. They didn't have an instrument, but she said they would have used one if they had one. So what you see here on the right-hand side first is a cricket bat, something I don't know that I'd seen before I went over there. But I used that cricket bat to draw that circle. See that circle right there in the sand? You can't quite see all of it. Well, you all have seen that circle many times on PowerPoint slides. From 2 John 9, the circle that says we must stay within the doctrine of Christ. I drew the circle on the ground and put a couple of little dots outside that circle. I said, in a couple of your practices, you're not within the doctrine of Christ. You're practicing things, or you would practice things that are not found in Christ's New Testament. She came to the meetings in the evening, and I believe she heard some things that hopefully will take a root in her heart. This is Mildred, a person who had in the past not led that moral of a life. A person who in times past really perhaps hadn't been that interested in hearing the gospel. But she gave Jennifer and me a chance to talk to her. And we talked to her about the possibility of baptism. The problem was she was living with a man. Now, she had another place she could live. She could live with her mother, and she was willing to talk to her mother about that. But she wanted us to be the ones who told the man she was living with that if she became a Christian, she wouldn't be able to live with him anymore. So we agreed to do that. And it was quite a ways away. And there were a couple of the brethren then that had motorcycles, and we took advantage of the motorcycles, partly because it was further away and because there were some places to go through, that it was better just to go through with the motorcycle. And you can see Jennifer on the back of the motorcycle going through the small creek there. And so we went to the place where we thought we'd have a chance to meet with the man, and we talked to the family for a while, but the man wasn't there. It turns out he'd gone to get a drink, and by drink I do mean an alcoholic drink. And so the consensus was it was probably best not to wait around for him to get back. That probably wouldn't be the best time to talk to him. And so we decided to go back to the church building. And about the time we got ready to depart, the dark, rainy clouds began to appear. And thanks to those motorcycles, we made it back. Well, we didn't quite make it back. Maybe the last 200 or 300 yards we got rained on. And let me tell you, in Guyana, when it rains, it rains. So we were grateful for the motorcycle. Well, what's the rest of the story? Well, the rest of the story is, since he wasn't available that time, we asked, well, when could we come back and meet with your husband to tell him about your desire possibly to become a Christian, and that would mean you wouldn't be able to live with him anymore. Well, if you can't stand the answer, don't ask the question. The time that was best, she thought, was before he went to the field in the morning, which means we needed to be at her house at 6 o'clock. And we may have the record for the earliest Bible study, at least in that village. Well, we went early in the morning, again, thanks to the people with the motorcycles. And I will tell you, when I first saw this guy, I wasn't sure that he was the guy I wanted to be telling at 6 o'clock in the morning that his wife was going to need to leave him so she could become a Christian. But he was, as so many of them were, friendly. In fact, we wound up having a short Bible study with him also. Now, as of the time we left, she had not left him. But as we talked to both of them, she had settled down enough in her life from her former activities that she was wanting to be married. And from all we could determine, both of them were eligible to be married. So as we left, there were the plans for the wedding were beginning. And I really believe that after she is married, I believe that she will be baptized. One more story. This is Madeline. She is toasting peppers. Again, somebody who had a craft at home. We had an opportunity to study with her. This is her right here sitting beside Jennifer. Her brother was already a Christian, but again, a person in times past who hadn't been that interested, but at this time seemed willing to listen. She was an interesting person. She had an interest in becoming a Christian, but we began to talk to her about repentance. And was there anything in her life she was not willing to give up? Yes, there was. She plainly said some things she was not willing to give up. She wouldn't share with us what those things were, but at least she was honest about that part of it. Before I leave this picture, I want to mention that guy on the right. He wasn't a part of the Bible study in the beginning. I guess when we first saw him, he was off kind of in a shed, repairing his bicycle tire with crazy glue. If you have trouble with your bicycle tires, this man would recommend crazy glue. And he kind of was on the periphery of the Bible study, and then he was closer, and then we kind of joined him in the conversation. Pretty soon he was sitting down, and by the time we left, he was reading things out of the Scriptures. He was reading the Scriptures. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. Well, what about the lady here? Well, she came to the evening meetings. And I had a picture of the crowd, and there she is. She was in the crowd. It's kind of a fuzzy picture because I had to blow it up. By the way, this right here, that's Mrs. Sam. She was there also. But this was a lady, and she was lingering after the Bible, after the evening worship, after the evening lecture, after the evening meeting. And you know, sometimes people may not ask for help, but you just kind of get an impression from the way they behave that might be receptive. So we sat and we talked to her some more. She would still not name the thing that she was not willing to give up. And I talked to her and I said, well, you know, doesn't the fact that you're not willing to name it, doesn't that mean that you're ashamed of it? Well, she wouldn't disagree with any of that, but she would still not name it. But what she agreed to do, she agreed to meet with one of the women of the congregation. There was somebody there, and the name was brought up, and she knew the person, and she agreed to talk with that person about the thing. So maybe somebody making some steps of progress toward becoming a Christian. Here, again, a very fuzzy Google map. Google doesn't have very clear images of this part of the world, but lots of little GPS waypoints. Evangelism by wandering around. But it wasn't just the evangelism by wandering around. We had our opportunities to preach and teach. This is back in the preaching school in Lethem. I had an opportunity to teach the students there for an hour and a half. I loved it. It was great. On the return trip through Georgetown, there are a couple of congregations in Georgetown. When we got there that morning, they asked me if I would preach, and I did, and I was glad to have the opportunity to do that. Back to the village of Aurora now, not only were the evangelism by wandering around during the day, but we had Bible studies for the men and the women about 5 o'clock, and then around 6 or 6:30 or 7, we had an evening lecture, an evening preaching service. And I had an opportunity to preach in 2 of those. I don't have any video of me preaching, but this guy right here is named Roger Comstock. He is from Tennessee. And I showed you Jerry Davidson, who's responsible for the Amerindian missions in general. Well, of the 2 villages, Jerry went to the other village. So this was the guy who went with us, who was our leader while we were there, and he was a very capable and competent leader. And he preached one evening, and I thought I would give you a chance. I just have a few seconds of the translation here. Again, most people speak English, but some of the older ones still understand better in their native Wapishani language. I thought you might like to listen to a few seconds of Wapishani. And again, I think you can see it probably sounds more like India. In fact, in Guyana, there were kind of two groups of people, maybe some who had been there longer and some who were more recent extractions from the country of India. Some there had the English-sounding names, I guess, from the British heritage, like Thomas George. Then there was a guy who went around and helped me, whose name was Dharmendra, who was a more recent, his family was more recently from the country of India. The evening meetings were well attended. The last night, I would say we had 120, 130. There was truly standing room only, some standing in the back. The people came. And the teaching of the classes, Jennifer taught the children's class. You can just look at that crowd, and I don't have to tell you how successful the classes were. The people came to hear her teach. And men can teach children, there's no doubt. But there is a way that a woman can relate to children that is just very, very helpful. She also taught the ladies' classes. In times past, Jennifer had a ladies' Bible class in the morning at around 8 o'clock. Well, the guy who was our leader decided he wanted to have parallel men's and women's classes around 5 or 6 in the evening, so she did that. But you know, the people who in years past had been to her 8 o'clock class, they showed up anyhow. So she had the classes at 8 o'clock in the morning and in the evening also. There were 3 women on the combined trip. And I tell you, without harming any of the women, no matter how you divide up 3 women, one of the village only gets 1 woman. And there are so many more opportunities, places where they were needed to teach. And I want to mention also Jennifer in teaching her classes. She was not just teaching the Bible. She was teaching those women how to teach the Bible. She was teaching those women how to teach children. We need more women. They need more women. I'm saying we already. We need more women. More women are needed in Guyana to teach. The last thing that I want to cover is showing that we cared. We had an opportunity to do that in the church. There was the sewing machines that some of you contributed to. There were 4 sewing machines, actually. One you contributed the funds for. There was another one that another group did. And some people that the Teagues had met and befriended up at the Chinese restaurant just across I-35, just across 3009, the Adang restaurant. They contributed a whole year's worth of tips. And that was more than enough to buy a sewing machine. But thanks to the contributions of the sewing machine, and they were the hybrid machines. They would run off electricity, or since they do not have electricity there all the time, in some villages they don't have electricity, it was the old treadle machines. And they learned how to use those. So thanks to some expert instruction and some not so expert instruction, they learned how to use those. This is Granny. She is older, but she is not slow. She was attentive to that sewing machine, and she seemed to take every opportunity to get behind the wheel and learn how to use it, and she did.
She's getting the hang of it.
She got the hang of it. She was using that thing. It's not only something to help make their clothes. It becomes an item around which some of their fellowship is centered. And thanks to you providing the money for the sewing machine, and of course, along with the sewing machine, there was enough money to buy some mosquito netting, to buy some material, to buy some zippers, and to buy thread. Lots and lots of thread. But that was not all that you sent. You remember those 2 trunks that you filled up out there with medical supplies and other kinds of things, hygiene aids that they would need? Those were taken, they were sorted, they were arrayed for the people to be able to use, and some clothes also, including some flip-flops. And then at a couple of the evening meetings afterwards, they were made available to the people. And some of the brethren were there to help them pick the best kind of medicines, and we did have at least one medic among us. The best kind of eyeglasses for helping them read the Bible. And the right size, they would not call them flip-flops, they call them slippers. So they wanted to make sure they got the right size slippers. So a part of the showing that we cared occurred directly in the church building for some of the Christians that were there and for some of those who were visitors to the services. We had an opportunity to go to one of the schools that was close by. What a joy. Some of us went there a couple of times as we did the evangelism by wandering around. And then on the last day, almost all of us went there at once and took a couple of trunks filled with things, and we passed out pencils, and we passed out some of the slippers, the flip-flops, and had a chance to see the schools. I was impressed with the schools. We would do well perhaps to send some of our teachers over there to learn about the discipline that children can have in school and about some teaching techniques. They didn't have too many fancy things, but they had visual aids. They had the visual aids around the rooms. And while we were there, the guy who was our leader, Roger Comstock, led the children in some singing. Evidently, he had done this in times past and knew that it would be okay. And imagine this happening in North America.
Yes, Jesus loves me, the Bible tells me so.
Thank you. You are so pretty and sweet and behave so well. I'm impressed.
And notice that the smart guy that he is, he does not miss an opportunity to invite the children to the evening meetings. And oh, by the way, be sure to bring your parents.
Thank you for letting us interrupt your day. Will you come and visit us at the church? Bring your mom.
Bring your mom and your dad. This guy in the upper right-hand corner is the schoolmaster. I think he's been the schoolmaster there for 30, 35 years. A good guy, was gracious and allowed us. And oh, by the way, he came to the evening meetings. What was the overall impact of the showing that we cared? Again, you all helped greatly with that. But also, we stand on the shoulders of those who had been there before. The people in that village knew that when those big old noisy trucks carrying the combined team of North and South Americans from the Church of Christ, when they came into that village, we cared about the people. The guy that with the box around him is the Tusha. He is the tribal leader. The first morning after we got there, he came to visit us and welcome us. People in that area know that those people who call themselves by the names Church of Christ, they care. And you know the old evangelism saying, people don't care how much you know until they first know how you care. Those people know that we care. And again, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for helping send us. Thank you for all the things that you sent with us. And the last two slides that I have, I just stole from Jennifer's briefing. Those of you from the ladies who've seen that will have seen these two last slides. I kept them because I thought they were really good. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how shall they call upon him in whom they've not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? Thank you for making the trip possible. And oh, by the way, I left Jennifer's little advertisement there. The next trip is in October. But I told you that I wanted to tell you some more about this guy on the end of the bench. The guy who was kind of on the periphery and kind of got closer and closer. We involved him in the conversation. He sat down, and by the end, he was reading the Bible. There were things that he heard, there were things that he read that evidently he'd never seen or read before. And he knew they were the truth. I know that he knew they were the truth because he looked at me and he says, if this is the truth, what took you so long to get here with it? What do you say? What would you say? What would you say? I know there are people all over the world who have not heard the gospel, or not have heard much of the gospel, or have not heard the one true unadulterated gospel. But I tell you, when you've seen their faces, it makes a difference. And it really makes a difference when they look you square in the face and say, where have you been? Thank you for sending us. Of course, there are people in North America who need the gospel also. Maybe there's some in the audience this evening. It's a simple plan. You need to hear about God. You need to hear about Jesus, his son. You need to believe in them. You need to repent. Luke 13:3, Jesus says, if you don't repent, you're going to perish. Repenting is the hard part. We found some very good soil in South America, and we found some people very honest about repenting. It's deciding to leave some of those old things behind. That's the part that sometimes makes becoming a Christian difficult. But that's the part that will change your life. Baptism will change the status of your sins. After baptism, they're forgiven. But it is the repentance that changes your heart that results in a changed life. And then, of course, the baptism for the forgiveness of sins. If they're there, those here this evening who have not done that, we would encourage you to do it without delay. You can do it tonight if you'll come forward as we sing.